Of course, it would be galling if the president did it, but that a sitting congressperson from her personal Twitter account would fire essentially the chairman of the Federal Reserve, as if it's news about the Kardashians or news about.
Welcome to the Gray Rabbit Finance Podcast, where we trace the truth behind the money. Today, I have a very special guest, Jp Cortez. He's the Executive Director of the Sound Money Defense League, a nationally renowned policy group known for its commitment to advocating for stable and constitutional monetary system since 2014. Welcome to the channel, JP.
Thanks for having me on, Gray Rabbit. It's good to be here.
So, a lot's been happening recently. We've got gold up 38% year to date. It's hovering around $3,328 per ounce right now. And recently you said in a tweet, the world is rediscovering the value of trustless, counterparty-risk-free money. What was your personal aha moment that made you turn to precious metals?
For me, it was like for so many others, it was Ron Paul. It was discovering Ron Paul at an early age and reading some of his literature, which eventually took me to the Mises Institute. So you had Austrian economics and these fundamental ideas of liberty, of freedom, and of markets, of choice. And what I found after studying at the Institute for many summers was that there was an alternative to the financial system in which we live in today. And fortunately for us, the work has already been done for thousands of years. The market has already been affirmatively testing gold and silver as sound money. And the market has discovered that gold and silver make good money, not through edict or through a congressional act, but through the virtues of gold and silver and its own properties. So it became very clear to me that today's monetary system, as it exists, is essentially a scheme with which to pillage the wealthy and extract wealth from them to further enrich the already wealthy and connected. And giving a government printing power enables that. It even incentivizes it. And politicians are unable to avoid this allure. And so after studying for a long time, you kind of realize that gold, or rather money production, is maybe the most sought after power that humans have actively sought since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of time, governments and shysters and schemers have been trying to turn lead to gold, trying to create something out of nothing. This fiat monetary system gives them that power. And that's why gold and silver need to be reinstated, because wars all over the world have been fought in our name. Bureaucracy has exploded. And all of this is a result of lack of sound money.
And recent data suggests that between now and the end of this year, there's going to be 50 basis point Fed rate cuts. I think that can safely say that inflation is going to be coming back. And how exactly can you, for someone who's not versed in this, can you tell us how the monetary policies quietly steal from everyday people?
And I can explain it using pretty elementary principles that we've all understood for a long time. The principle of dilution. We understand that if you take wine and you add water to it, the potency of any given glass of wine from that carafe will be lowered. The same process happens when you print money and you inject it into this economy. It lowers the purchasing power of each individual dollar. Since there are more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, what you have is a necessary increase in the general price level. Inflation is a quiet theft. It is mandated policy. The government, if you look at the Federal Reserve's website, they tell you they have an intentional goal of 2% inflation. That's the government telling you that they intentionally steal 2% from your holdings every year, year over year. If you do the math, if at 2% inflation over 20 years, the value of your dollar has nearly halved. So it's impossible to save in an environment like this. The government's monetary system is actively depreciating. And people are looking then for alternatives because people understand and naturally want to save. They want to be able to save for the future, for an emergency, or for plans of growing a business or starting a family. That is human nature, but they're unable to do this because the fraudulent paper money that has been foisted upon us does not allow for that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a well put statement there. And real wage growth hasn't kept up. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on that as well. And also, think a lot of people would argue that these numbers, the inflation numbers at least, are underreported, not including food or energy prices in CPI. So, yeah,
Of course, and that speaks to, a really important point there that like these metrics are obviously cooked. These
mhm.
are like fraudulent numbers that the government has been giving us for many years regarding this topic and surely many others. Mises once said that, paraphrasing, but that a dutiful housewife is a better inflation metric than these government metrics. Anyone who goes to a grocery store regularly or is running a family budget knows that the inflation numbers are not the lies that the government and its institutions are reporting them to be.
Yeah, exactly, man. You just reminded me of something. I was doing this article the other day about the Joey Chestnut hot dog index. So I thought about Costco. So right now the Costco hot dog is $1.50 still. And the CEO was like, I will effing kill you if you raise the price.
Mhm.
And but if you calculate the true inflation, that meal today should cost around $4.40. So,
Mhm.
this is, everyone who's been to a store knows this. So that leads me
Or
to
rented an apartment, or tried to
yeah,
pay an energy bill, or tried to buy a used car, or so on and so on. It's an economy wide issue.
with gold climbing and silver nearing a 14-year high at $39.50, amid these fresh tariff threats, are we witnessing a silent but powerful vote of no confidence in the US dollar?
I think that is exactly what is happening. But all around the world, both enemies of the United States, adversaries, but also emerging economies and even allies are realizing that this global reserve system, where the US dollar is the global reserve currency, uh, gives the United States an outsized amount of power in terms of global economics. And even people that are not currently against the United States are looking at this and seeing how the United States has weaponized and perverted its dollar to use as a political weapon. And now even allies are saying, hey, if we end up on the wrong side of them, our assets can be seized, our settlement payments can be cut off. We need something that it has less exposure to the political problems of the US dollar. And naturally, the entire world, seemingly, from countries all over the world to US states themselves to individuals, are looking at this geopolitical and this monetary problem and coalescing around the greatest global monetary asset that the world has ever seen for thousands of years, being gold. So it we that I think that is very much what we're seeing. And before it happened in hushed tones behind closed doors, but BRICS and other groups are now speaking very openly about the idea of pivoting away from this monetary system that the United States has had close to full control over for decades now.
And I think too that I'm more on the technical analysis side of things, and I think that you can see this all reflected in the charts. The DXY this year has been down to 95, which is now retracing back up. It's currently sitting at 98, but it's down from 104 earlier in 2025. Like we said, silver is nearing an all-time high around $39.50, nearing its 2011 high of $49.80. And then we've also got all these new tariffs that President Trump is introducing. And so, like you said, I think it's just a global shift to gold and commodities as these trade tensions reignite. And just central banks all over the world trying to lessen the risk of holding US dollar, which can be frozen in the SWIFT system if
Mhm.
they don't stay in line. If anyone is interested in technical analysis, please check out my Substack. Every week I do analysis of gold, silver, miners, Bitcoin, oil, US dollar index, and S&P 500, all blending Western and Eastern technical analysis. Recently, we've heard some chatter about Jerome Powell potentially stepping down. If he were listening right now, what would you say to him about the ripple effects of the Fed policy from home buyers to foreign reserves?
I'm interested because it might be the case that by the time this comes out, Jerome Powell is no longer Chairman Powell. For months now, he has been the subject of abuse from the president, and we know that for a long time the party line has been that the Fed is an independent institution.
Hmm.
And this is a complete myth. The Fed is a politicized institution that generally acts to carry out the administration's will. And it is a tool in doing so. But that in itself, of course, is the larger issue. The Federal Reserve has outsized amount of power over the economy with its manipulation of interest rates. That is the governing switch that affects everyone from business owners or prospective business owners to homeowners to people using credit in any significant way. And when you think about how an economy grows, of course, we know that savings, at least according to the Austrian school, savings precedes spending. So through the act of capital accumulation, we find that infrastructure develops and technologies develop. And this is how society and economies are bettered, are made better off, when the government starts manipulating with interest rates, which is another way to say the price of money. What you end up with is what Mises called malinvestment. You have a bunch of business ventures that perhaps in an example would not have happened if not for artificially low interest rates. You have, in another example, a case where output and employment is strangled because interest rates are kept artificially high by the Federal Reserve. And in between all of those violent oscillations is what causes the boom and bust cycle, as the Austrians explained. And so this engineering of the economy is ultimately what the Federal Reserve gets wrong, that this central planning fails because they can't possibly have society-wide dispersed, distributed information that is spread throughout the economy. And by trying to centrally plan it, you end up creating booms, creating busts, and ultimately creating a society that's poorer, that's more prone to recessions and depressions, and just generally oscillations in the market. That is not the sign of a sustainable economy. This is one that has been propped up by this constant feeding and allowing of easy money that has poisoned this economy.
Yeah, I also would like to add too that I think it creates the illusion of a free market when this can be manipulated so heavily.
That's a great point.
You mentioned something about the Fed is independent, because I'd like I just wanted you to clear up something, because I have a tweet, I'm going to put it up. This is from Representative Anna Paulina Luna. She said, Jerome Powell is going to be fired. Firing is imminent. Now, I'm under the impression that the Congress would have to amend the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 in order to do that. But maybe you can clear that up for us.
I did say that the Fed was a quote unquote independent bank. That is a private institution. As for the tweet that you just mentioned, I saw that tweet this morning as well and was taken back. Of course, it would be galling if the president did it, but that a sitting congressperson from her personal Twitter account would fire essentially the chairman of the Federal Reserve, as if it's news about the Kardashians or news about the most recent reality TV or whatever it is. Yeah. So a lot of the decorum around American politics has sort of fallen by the wayside, in my opinion, for the better. Once we stop pretending that this isn't a glorified mafia or a mob, then we can kind of get to the root of addressing the problem.
I saw the tweet and I was like, I don't think that can actually happen, but that's interesting. So JP, after nearly 12 years of work from the Sound Money Defense League, what trends or developments are standing out to you now?
I can say that sound money is being considered and even enacted in ways that we have not seen perhaps ever. When we started this project back in 2014, the Sound Money Defense League, there certainly was no organized effort on policy pertaining to sound money, not at the state level or the federal level. Very few people talking about or working on this issue. Whereas fast forward to today, where in the year 2025, we've had more than 32 states across the United States introduce and consider legislation, pro gold and silver legislation this year, and more than a dozen have enacted these laws. You're talking about nearly 75% of the United States is actively thinking about reintegrating gold and silver into their balance sheet or removing the disincentives and the friction around using gold and silver, buying, selling, and using gold and silver as money for or individual investors. I don't think we've crested. This movement can only continue to get bigger, and subsequently, year over year, we have found this movement gets larger every time. And so I mentioned this is our biggest year. 2024 was our biggest year before that, 2023 before that. And so the amount of growth is incredible. And I think one of the things that I've noticed recently is that we've had so much success over the last 12 years doing things like removing sales tax and capital gains tax on gold and silver and establishing gold reserves that we have brought in, we've helped create a movement that has brought in a lot of helpers and a lot of other people interested in these projects. The slight issue is that, unfortunately, some of them don't have the technical knowledge or the background to be writing some of this legislation, even though it is well-intentioned. So we want to make sure we're supporting policies that make sense For example, you may have heard, and there was news about the bill in Florida that Governor DeSantis was very excited about, and the talk about transactional gold, and it's being presented as a sound money innovation, a step forward for freedom and liberty, but it is the farthest thing from that. This is a bill that, in all of my years, I've never seen such convoluted language passed by a government. In fact, I'm shocked that this would be signed into law. It creates an entire regulatory scheme for all precious metals dealers and depositories and storage providers and anyone in those related industries. And it requires them to register with the government under these strict regulations. And it's an entire system of surveillance. And
well, just to clarify, this is from Florida, right? From Governor DeSantis?
Yes. Okay. I spent the weekend combing over the language. And I realized it's worse than we thought. It's written poorly. It's ambiguous. And so this what is presented as a sound money freedom thing is very much not that. That is what is happening here is like a governmentizing, weaponization almost, creating a system that a government could then take and use to spy or it misses the point of sound money and kind of the purposes of all of this. On the other hand, there are really great allies in some cases. Just last week, I'm happy to say I attended a great webinar with Catherine Austin Fitts from the Solari Report and her team, where she highlighted a great number of times the importance of not putting the cart before the horse. There's this great excitement for some reason, I guess, in line with this stablecoin stuff and CBDCs and asset-backed digital currencies. People, for some reason, are really excited to try to build this digital system before an analog system is even built. States in many cases don't own a single ounce of gold, have no idea how to use it or store it or its value. So to create these convoluted private-public partnerships with a state, it doesn't make sense. And so I say that to say not all sound money bills are built equally. When you read something on your Twitter feed about, another sound money bill passed in XYZ, you should look into what that means, because we have to be diligent. We have, at least in the case of the state legislatures, there are nearly 8,000 state legislators across the country, the vast majority of which are unfamiliar with sound money, certainly have not asked themselves deep questions about what money is or where it derives its value. So legislation is hard. Introducing legislation is hard. Getting it passed is even harder. And we have to be diligent not to be distracted by policies that maybe sound fashionable or are timely, topical. And we have to make sure that we're supporting laws that are ultimately good for sound money, good for freedom, good for privacy, good for stability. And in some cases, I'm afraid to say, in this Florida case at least, the language that was passed as it exists today misses the mark.
Okay, well, that's very interesting to hear, JP. And it just makes me wonder, and maybe you can answer this. Do you think that as all this legislature that becomes more restrictive towards sound money, do you think that is kind of a telltale sign that we're nearing the end game?
I think that the end game is here. This is not a sustainable monetary system. We've known that for a long time. And pressure valves, cracks where steam is starting to release, are forming. You're seeing it in the United States, where states themselves are actively de-dollarizing, where states themselves are adopting policies to mitigate the damage that's caused by the federal government and the Federal Reserve. So domestically, you can see this happening internally, even outside of America's borders too. Like I mentioned, you've got BRICS countries talking about a new gold currency. You've got Zimbabwe building gold currencies. You've got places like Germany and other countries talking about repatriating their gold out of the United States. So yeah, I think we've seen the historically, the lifespan of a fiat money, I think, is near 100 years, something like that. And at this point, the United States, the Federal Reserve Note being established in 1913, puts us just at over 100 years, 112 years, something like that. So yes, I think that you're seeing it happen. You're seeing it play out. And it's death by a thousand cuts, because there are people now with great incentive. I'm certainly not a Russia apologist, but the idea that a country like Russia could see the monetary abuse that the United States just placed on it through sanctions and say, hey, wait, what if we reduced our exposure to this politicized money and convert it into non-political money, non-politicized money, counterparty risk-free money? So yeah, I think the end game is near. This is a moribund paper currency, and there are things that the United States could do to try to re-inject confidence into the dollar. But at this point, the competitors have made themselves known, and it's up to the United States if they want to shape up and be better stewards of America's money. They can be, but they've
Okay.
shown no willingness or even capacity to do so.
You just mentioned something, reestablishing trust in the system. So recently, you've reintroduced the Gold Reserve Transparency Act. With no Fort Knox audit in over 65 years, what's the real risk here, and why should today's Americans care, not just gold bugs or historians?
So this bill, the Gold Reserve Transparency Act, was introduced by Congressman, reintroduced this year by Thomas Massie of Kentucky. And so shouts to him for carrying this important bill. Why should people care? Because it's their gold. Because the American government does not own that gold. The Federal Reserve does not own that gold. That gold belongs to American taxpayers. And for hundreds of years, 100 years, the United States dollar became the strongest monetary unit the world had ever seen, in part because it was bolstered by the strength of the underlying asset, the greatest sound money the world has ever seen, gold. So the risk here is that the gold is potentially not there, or if it is there questions about who owns it, the ownership claims to it. While it is true that gold today is not tied in any way to the Federal Reserve note, the paper green note that we use here in America, it is untrue, though, that there is no tie. It is not an explicit tie, but it's implicit. And that's why the United States has on record the greatest global stockpile of gold in the world. And that you can question whether or not that's true anymore, because China has been importing gold secretly for years now. But the United States has held on to this gold for so long because it is the fundamental, it's the building block of a global economy. It's the final extinguisher of debt. It lacks counterparty risk. It has all of the features that you want in an ultimate money. So the risk would be those doors opening wide and it being shown that the United States emperor has no clothes, that it's all a fraud. Shorts would be obliterated. There would be massive price implications. And globally, there would be a massive stain on the United States as an economic powerhouse, as a trusted government partner. So this would be a huge deal, not just for people who spend their lives working on gold and silver, not just for depository institutions or auditors, but for everyday Americans who have benefited strongly from having a money that is the global reserve currency and having a Federal Reserve central bank that politicizes interest rates so as to cause boom and busts. There's a lot of benefits to these sort of weaponizations, and many times they come at the detriment to other countries. This affects all of us globally. Like we've said, the countries all over the world are stockpiling gold at rates never seen before. And to see now that all of these other countries have these stockpiles and the United States have none would be a massive deal for the American economy.
I wanted to ask you, well, I want to bring up something that happened back in 1974. This is just a little excerpt from one of my articles, but it was, who was Louis N. Alchinschloss Boyer, the Rockefeller aide who fell to her death? So in the 1974 Fort Knox audit followed another pivotal event, the death of Louise Boyer, Nelson Rockefeller's executive assistant for over 14 years. 3 days after, a Los Angeles Times article cited her as the source of claims that the Rockefellers had looted Fort Knox. Boyer was found dead beneath her 10th floor apartment window. Police labeled it a suicide, but conspiracy theorists note the timing and her role in exposing gold discrepancies as suspicious. But if you were to pull back the curtain at Fort Knox, is it there or is it leased out?
I think that it is highly unlikely that there would be more gold in there than what is reported.
Okay.
I don't think the United States is doing a China secret buying, quietly increasing hoards. I don't think that's happening. If I had to guess, I would say that, yeah, the amount of gold in there is probably similar to what is on the papers, the balance sheets, the Excel cells in the Federal Reserve's accounting system. I think what you would find when you open that door is about the same amount of ounces, but what you'd find unpure bars. Most of America's gold stockpile today is made up of 90% coin bars. These are not liquid bars. They, obviously you wouldn't want Secretary Bessent or anyone to liquidate or to sell the gold bars. But the truth is, right now, even if they wanted to, they couldn't, because they do not meet current global standards. So you'd find a lot of unpure bars that don't meet, standards or requirements by global markets. I think, though, the question, if there is a question at all, it comes to ownership claims. It comes to whether or not the gold has been leased or swapped or encumbered in any way in any financial transaction. If it has been pledged to the Bank of International Settlements or the International Monetary Fund, Germany, Russia, France, the Vatican. There are stories all over of gold coming in and out. And frankly, there also is a ton of reported information on the malfeasance, I'll call it, of these practices, of their depository and auditing practices. Jan Nieuwenhuis, who is an excellent gold analyst now with Money Metals Exchange, has done a ton of work on reporting on how storage compartments are regularly opened and then sealed without audits taking place after. Compartments are moved, seals are broken. There's a lot of stuff that has been unaccounted for that, frankly, if it took place in the private market at a private depository, it would trigger investigations. There would be
Wow.
these would be crimes. But here, this is commonplace practice at the Federal Reserve. So to be sure, the reason that these conspiracy theorists, as these Fort Knox conspiracy theorists exist, quote unquote, is really the same reason any quote unquote conspiracy theorists exist, and that's because the government is unbelievably frivolous,
Yeah.
and they've lied and they've been shady and they have been dishonest in every way to Sunday, and of course, people rightfully are asking legitimate questions, and there are a million legitimate questions that surround America's gold holdings, despite the cacophony of mainstream analysts and politicians, the conspiracy theorists, and you guys are tin hat wear, whatever that
Yeah.
is. These questions are valid, and like I said at the beginning, this is not President Trump's gold. This is not Secretary Bessent's gold. This is the gold of American taxpayers, and they have the right to these answers.
And I think too that in the past years, the conspiracy theorists have been undefeated.
Experts, quote unquote, have
Yeah,
taken big fat L's for years now.
they can debunk whatever they want, but the truth always comes out, right? And
Mhm.
so let's move on to the BRICS. BRICS now hold over 20% of the world's gold. Central banks bought 20 tons in May 2025 alone. And is this just diversification, or is this the start of a deliberate decoupling from the dollar? And just as a follow-up, I want to know what do you make of Judy Shelton's proposed U.S. gold-backed treasury bonds,
Hmm.
which could be coming out, I heard, possibly July 4th, 2026.
So on the BRICS stuff, I think it's a bit of both. Undeniably, gold provides benefits to a balance sheet. So the diversification argument is strong. It reduces drawdowns. It performs well. For a lot of reasons, gold makes a good benefit to a portfolio. So countries, yeah, are probably looking at just returns. You can look at just returns and say, wow, just that in itself is a strong argument to have some exposure to gold. But then you add in all of the other stuff about counterparty risk mitigation, about being a geopolitical hedge against currency wars and against trade wars. And you start realizing that, yes, there appears to be a larger trend at play here. This is not just gold, or this is not countries, especially adversarial countries, who have said, "Oh, we'll have a couple of ounces of gold on hand just in case." This is countries from enemies, quote unquote,
Yeah.
Russia, China, India, to emerging economies, Poland, Turkey, to even allies, Germany, Mexico. These countries are talking more and more, with a variety of relationships with the United States, and there is a global movement happening here that's undeniable. And like we mentioned before, it's the sanctions, it's the weaponization of America's money used as a cudgel for so many years to help America's friends or to harm America's enemies. And I
Mhm.
think the world largely has seen that and is moving away from it. And like I mentioned, this is we can talk about the BRICS countries, and obviously that is a great indicator of what's happening. But look inward, even in the United States, where we're seeing states that are actively establishing gold stockpiles because they are being very loud. They're being explicit about their reason for doing this being to reduce exposure that they have to the United States dollar. So
Mhm.
much of their balance sheet is dollar denominated assets, a lot of which has real negative rates of return when you count for the actual inflation rate. So these government financiers are saying, look, we're returning 5% on our investments. And some of these states are saying, Well, inflation is probably at like 6 or 7%. So what you're telling me is that we're taking a loss on our investments. We
Mhm.
need something better. So Utah has done this
Yeah.
now, I believe, over 100 million in gold to store in their state. This year, we worked in Wyoming to establish a $10 million gold reserve. Others are doing it as well. So I do think this is, indicative of the larger global trend, which is away from this era of US dollar dominance, of an era of debt and deficit spending and credit, to
Mhm.
an era of commodities, an era of sound money, an era of tangible wealth.
I just saw a chart the other day that showed that gold was outperforming the stock market over the past 25 years, including dividends. And you mentioned some states. I saw that Idaho and Wyoming, you mentioned, were building gold reserves. This is the start of a bottom-up financial revolution, you think?
I do absolutely think that's what it is. And that's been the goal from the beginning. We
Mhm.
in 2014, we looked and we said, okay, we were able to identify that the root cause of this dysfunction of the poison that infects the global economy and the United States economy today is Congress, it's the federal branch of government, and it's the Federal Reserve. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that states can do. So
Mhm.
how do we create then a bottom up movement instead of a top down imposed movement? And we found that the states was largely the best answer to go about doing that. I will say
Awesome.
that Idaho actually has not established a gold reserve. This year, we worked in Idaho to pass two
Oh,
bills, a symbolic legal tender bill and an elimination of the capital gains when you sell your gold and silver in Idaho.
okay.
But last year, there was a great drama that unfolded in Boise because the legislature duly approved a bill that would have allowed the state treasurer to invest in gold if he or she wanted to. It did not mandate an investment at all. It simply added gold to the list of approved investments that the state could invest in if they so chose. The
Okay.
governor said, absolutely not. I do not want my state to have that power. I don't want my money managers to have that power. I want to remove that tool, that option from them. And he unilaterally chose to veto the bill that would have given Idaho that option. At the
Wow.
time, the price of gold was, I think, maybe even below $2,000. This
Mhm.
is he was derelict in his fiduciary duty to the state, and he lost the state out on millions of dollars simply because
Wow.
he didn't even want, or obviously didn't understand it enough to just give the state the option to do so. So to be sure, there are a lot of positive wins, but this is still an uphill battle, and when we're
Yeah.
creating the environment that not one that imposes a system, not one that works through state regulation to create a system, but one that clears the thistle and the briar out of the way of innovative people innovating and creating within this space.
I know that you've tracked all this momentum at the state level through your book, The Sound Money Index. For listeners who haven't seen it, what does it measure and what's the biggest takeaway from the latest edition?
So thank you for mentioning that.
No
This
problem.
is the Sound Money Index. There's a 2025 edition. We put it out every year in coordination with Money Metals Exchange. And it's a scorecard we put out that ranks all 50 states based on their pro or anti sound money policies. And this helps us determine which states offer the best environments. We use a variety of criteria, including a state's policies on taxing precious metals, sales tax, capital gains tax, gross excise tax, commercial business tax. We rank a state on whether or not it has reaffirmed that gold and silver are constitutional money, whether it
Mhm.
has established gold reserves for itself, an in-state depository, pension funds investing in gold. So it's a very robust scorecard. And we, again, put it out every year. We'll be putting out the 2026 Sound Money Index.
Okay.
And I'm happy to say that this next upcoming year will have the most changes on the scorecard that we've ever seen because more states than ever, even states towards the bottom of the index, are passing these sound money laws now. So at the top, you have states like Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska. These are states that have removed sales tax, removed capital gains, invested in gold. And then at the bottom, you have states like Vermont,
Mhm.
Mexico, that charge you a sales tax when you buy precious metals, charge you a sales tax or a capital gains tax when you sell precious metals. Many times they impose onerous harassment laws on dealers where essentially dealers become a surveillance tool for anyone that comes into their shop, and you have
Yeah.
to gather all this information on your customers and then upload it to a police database at the end of every single day or every single week, and who knows what the government does with it. The government has deputized coin shops and weaponized them and created systems of surveillance through them. So we go state to state removing those regulations as well. This is the index. I encourage all of you to check it out, anyone listening. If your state is on here and you see, oh, my state's at the bottom, please feel free to reach out. A number of these projects have gotten started because someone realized their state was poor on this issue and reached out and said, hey, I want to do something about it. So I encourage anyone who sees the index and wants to get involved to please reach out.
Everybody, check the link. The link below will be in the description. It sounds like pretty useful information to know.
It's an honor, honestly, that the Sound Money Index it's been quoted and referenced and cited on House floors and Senate floors all over the country, has been talked about in committee hearings. I personally know of a mint who moved their operation, who said that the Sound Money Index and this score that their state got was the impetus for them moving their operation to that state. So it's a great resource. It is a labor of love. It's great to provide this to people who are interested, to academics or business owners or anyone interested. Yeah, it's a great resource. I encourage everyone to check it out.
So now, JP, we talked about Congress, and I just want to talk about something. They just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, shielding AI from state regulation for up to a decade, while also weighing the anti-CBDC Surveillance Act to block a Fed-controlled digital dollar. With federal protection for AI and the Genius Act this week potentially paving the way for a surveillance-backed CBDC, are we witnessing the blueprint for a new digital gulag, one that threatens both privacy and financial freedom?
Yes. Yeah. We absolutely cannot, under any circumstance, allow for a nationwide government-disseminated CBDC for obvious security reasons, for obvious privacy reasons. There is a litany of precedents set by governments who would weaponize this. You don't have to look that far. You can look to our neighbors in the north. Canada is a great example of a country who weaponized their monetary system against people who made donations to truckers a couple of years ago. In China, you have, this social credit score, that very much chills. It has a chilling effect, and it affects the way a populace interacts with other people and with their government. On top of obvious constitutional issues, privacy issues, all of these concerns, another concern, I think, with a CBDC is its capacity to further implement monetary policy. If we all hold a master account at the Fed, being able to impose monetary policy by reducing or giving us negative interest rates on savings, making it very difficult, impossible even, for us to hold a balance past a certain amount or for a certain time. These are all ways that the government, through this mechanism that I so badly think we need to make sure is stopped, there are so many ways for them to further impose themselves in ways that we don't even know of, in ways that are insidious, in ways that are sinister. And frankly, these people have shown time and time again that they cannot be trusted with this power, neither to manage a money nor to protect the privacy rights of its citizens. So it is from a monetary policy side, from a privacy side, from a constitutional side, from a historical precedent side. This misses on all of the marks. So yes, I think this is a grave risk, and we need to be very diligent in stopping it.
And I've been noticing recently a lot of people on Twitter have been getting censored. And it was just kind of making me feel like, this is just a little taste of the same medicine. They don't like something you say. They don't like a meme that you post. They're going to turn your bank account off. You won't be able to order Uber Eats tonight,
And so in the case of, like you're mentioning there, in the case of Twitter or X, that's horrible to think like, oh, someone can simply make the decision. An unelected, faceless person can make a decision to throttle you down. Yeah. And obviously for people who make a living on Twitter and such, that's important. But extending further out, the government has the power to do that everywhere. If you say something you don't like, you can no longer buy a house. The balance in your account is frozen. You can no longer afford food. You can no longer, the entire oxygen supply in the way you interface with the world is shut off. Yeah. And that is a power that is too great to entrust to a state made of known liars.
And I think what you just said there is why I know why personally I'm advocating for sound money, and I know probably why you are as well, because it could literally save your family in the future. Truly. And so I want to know, to end here, what's the smartest first move for someone waking up to all of this?
The smartest first move to someone waking up to all of it, then I will presume that they have already read, because I think that is the smartest move. There are people, giants, who have come before us, who have done the work to identify the problems, to rebut the counter arguments that fiat proponents or MMT's proponents or whoever's, these apologists for these government monetary schemes, There are brilliant economists and thinkers before us that have already done the work. So learning is such an important part. The next thing you can do after you learn, in my opinion, get off of zero.
Yeah.
Gold, silver, the account balance has to be off of zero, not because necessarily that you'll buy gold and silver once and you'll be rich 10 years from now, but
Mhm.
because it'll help you understand that one of these things will hold value and your dollar denominated accounts are a depreciating asset. This is a
Yeah.
constantly inflationary tool. So the purchasing power will continually then deplete.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is such a powerful learning tool to me. So learn and then get off of zero. And from there, the other scales seem to fall off and the rest makes more sense. And it's easier to understand why governments abandoned sound money and replaced it with a money they could more easily control.
And I love what you said earlier about the glass of wine being watered down. That's such a great explanation. So, JP, one last thing. What's next on the horizon for you? How can our listeners follow your journey and connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, 2026, like I said, is shaping up to be hopefully what will be our greatest legislative year then. A year from now, I hope to be able to come back and say that 2026 was the biggest year we've had. The way I encourage everyone to get involved, and actually, if you're still listening to this, I will make one final plea to empower you or to help you realize that you have power in a state legislature. That is not necessarily true at the federal level. You can call your congressman. You'll probably get a form response. An aide might respond. Your message may or may not get to that congressperson. But on the state level, you have a voice. So if you're making phone calls or sending emails into Nashville or Atlanta or Lincoln, Nebraska or Salem, Oregon, your voice still carries weight there. So I encourage everyone, whether it's for sound money or any other freedom-minded thing that you can think of, realize that while political efficacy on the federal level is probably at an all-time low or at least very low historically, that is not the case at the state level. You have power, you have a voice. I encourage you to use it. You can help us if you want to get involved in these projects by going to soundmoneydefense.org. You can find there a sign-up form where we ask for your zip code and your email address. The reason we ask for your zip code is because we segment all of our lists by zip code. So if there's a legislative battle happening in New Jersey and you are in a state like Louisiana, you won't
Mhm.
receive alerts for the New Jersey bill. But if there's a
Okay.
hearing in Louisiana, we give you all the contact information, write a message for you. We make it very easy to get involved. So I encourage everyone to be a citizen activist, to be a warrior for sound money in your state legislature.
Awesome, man. And if you haven't followed JP on X, his handle is Jp Cortez 27. My handle is Gray Rabbit Finn. And just want to thank you for joining us today and tell everybody have a great day, great weekend, and peace.